This week on the video version of the Business of Tech, all the security news including tracking Okta and Microsoft breaches, browser-in-browser attacks, market sentiment being high while analysts worry of recession, plus Congress is moving on legislation and already defined MSPs, and employment trends to review as employers miss the obvious. All this and more, hit those like and subscribe buttons, and here are this week's stories. A phishing kit has been released that allows red teamers and wannabe cybercriminals to create effective single sign-on phishing login forms using fake Chrome browser windows. This allows a new browser-in-the-browser attack, creating fake browser windows within genuine browser windows to create convincing phishing attacks. It's not entirely a new attack, however. It was used by fake gaming sites in 2020 to steal Steam credentials. A set of templates has been released on GitHub, allowing red teamers to use them to create convincing phishing sign-in forms to test the defense of their clients or their own company's employees. CISA and the FBI said last week they're aware of possible threats to satellite communication or SATCOM networks in the US and worldwide. The security advisory also warned US critical infrastructure organizations of risks to SATCOM providers' customers following network breaches. The warning is related to the war in Ukraine, as outages to SATCOM operators started on February 28th, coinciding with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. New versions of Conti's ransomware source code have been reportedly leaked by a researcher displeased with the group's public declaration of support to Russia. Over the weekend, a link to the new package was published under the Conti Leaks Twitter handle. The source code has been uploaded to VirusTotal, and while password protected, the information required to open the file is available to cybersecurity teams. Conti has previously declared support of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Conti has certainly been under scrutiny. Google's threat analysis group has exposed the operations of a threat actor group dubbed Exotic Lily, an initial access broker linked to the Conti and Diaval ransomware operations. Exotic Lily uses large-scale phishing campaigns to breach targeted corporate networks and then sells access to those networks to ransomware gangs. Of note to listeners, the tag analysis broke down that the threat actors work primarily from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time during weekdays and log very little activity during the weekends. A 9 to 5 job. The recent Conti leaks show that many threat actors run their operations like a business, requesting days off, reporting to managers, and receiving salaries. On the defender's side, Orca Security released a study that details how a flood of security alerts can easily trigger alert fatigue. 49% of the respondents said their security teams are hit with more than 500 alerts each day. Beyond the sheer volume, a fair number of the alerts are inaccurate or unnecessary. Many said that 40% of the alerts are either false positives or of low priority. Fewer than 10% of the alerts received are truly critical and need immediate attention. But finding those critical alerts amid all the unimportant ones requires time and effort. More than half of the respondents said they spend at least 20% of their day reviewing alerts and determining which ones to prioritize. And if you think Log4j is old news, a new study indicates that 30% of Log4Shell instances remain unpatched. Why do we care? Old and new. Patching is the beast that never gets solved. How much attention was given to Log4j? And still 30% unpatched. That's the same old problem over and over again. Not saying I have a solution, but then again, an unsolved problem indeed cries out for some innovation. The other old news here is the business-like nature of these ransomware operations. I've covered that here before. However, on the new is both the changing attack vector, browser in the browser is new enough to be a new vector, and how politics plays into criminal activity. Gangs are turning on each other here over politics and war. The new action here is incorporating those new attack vectors into defense. Matter, the new smart home interoperability standard being developed by Google, Apple, Amazon, Samsung, and others, has been delayed again. Expected this summer, the launch has been rescheduled for the fall of 2022. Why the delay? To finalize the software development kit, or SDK, device manufacturers will use that to incorporate their products into the Matter ecosystem. The code for the SDK needs more work to ensure everything will operate together smoothly, due to a more significant than expected number of platforms adopting Matter. Now, why do we care? The promise of an integrated standard here has been hanging out there for a while, and while I'm disappointed to hear of a delay, I'll choose to take comfort in the reason. If overwhelming demand means the Matter standard is better developed out of the gate, that's good. Of course, it ratchets up the expectations further. Anyone in the smart home space cares to get this one over the line. The federal government is moving away from the DUNS number system and a new Unique Entity Identifier, a non-proprietary system, for federal contracting purposes. They are switching on April 4th. GSA urged organizations to update their ad hoc reports and saved searches in sam.gov and provide their sub-awardees their new information before April 4th. The sam.gov site and GSA systems will be shut down for maintenance during the first weekend of April. GSA noted that while it's handling the shift to the UEI system on government-wide contracting systems, individual federal agencies must prepare for any changes to their own systems. Now, why do we care? This is distinctly a blocking and tackling story, but if you do business with the federal government, this is a big deal. April 4th isn't that far away, and the GSA is right to note that changes are the agency's responsibility, as well as the individual companies themselves. If you do business with a Fed, the change is coming, and if you're considering it, there's a new process to be aware of. Well, more security news, it seems to come in waves. First, Okta has indicated that they are investigating signs of a data breach. Data extortion group Lapsus claims to have acquired superuser admin access to Okta.com and that it had accessed Okta's customer data. Screenshots reviewed by Bleeping Computer indicate the breach may have occurred months ago. An Okta CEO then confirmed that in January 2022, the company detected an attempt to compromise the account of a third-party customer support engineer working for one of our sub-processors. The matter was investigated and contained by the sub-processor. In a recent SEC filing, Okta has indicated it had over 15,000 customers. The company additionally stated, quote, "Based on our investigation to date, there is no evidence of ongoing malicious activity beyond the activity detected in January." This same hacking group claims to have leaked the source code for Bing, Cortana, and other projects stolen from Microsoft's internal Azure DevOps server. Monday night, the hacking group posted a torrent for a 9GB 7-zip archive containing the source code of over 250 projects that they say belong to Microsoft. When posting the torrent, Lapsus said it contained 90% of the source code for Bing and approximately 45% of the code for Bing Maps and Cortana. Security researchers who have pored over the leaked files told Bleeping Computer that they appear to be legitimate internal source code from Microsoft. Microsoft has indicated they are aware of the claims and are investigating. Second, the Biden administration has issued a specific warning about, quote, "the potential that Russia could conduct malicious cyber activity against the United States, including as a response to the unprecedented economic costs we've imposed on Russia alongside our allies and partners." The advisory specifically notes, quote, "evolving intelligence that the Russian government is exploring options for potential cyber attacks." During the daily White House press briefing, Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology, Ann Neuberger, said that intelligence was shared in a classified briefing with entities officials believe might be specifically targeted. Now, why do we care? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Let's start with the actionable stuff. The White House has been remarkably transparent about their intelligence around Russia and Ukraine on the physical war front, which helped minimize misinformation campaigns and head off any potential Russian pre-justification for conflict. It's reasonable to assume that's the case again here. Those specific entities have been warned, and yet everyone should be aware of the potential targeting and escalation. This is that batten down the hatches moment. I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight good backups too. Frank McGovern gives specific insights on tactics regarding Okta. First, share the information internally. Second, collect and retain related logs. Third, hunt logs for bad. 4, rotate Okta privileged passwords. And 5, move on unless Okta reaches out to you that you are involved. And a 6th, let your customers know you did these things. The attack avenue to Okta is customer service. People remain the vital link in security profiles, and minimizing the damage any person can inflict is a critical skill. Zero trust security, people. I'd add to Frank's direction guidance on using this as a time to examine least privilege access. There's actionable intelligence here, more than noise about disclosures or notification, which I've already seen pop up. Want better breach notifications? Support efforts to require them. Don't whine about it. While we're considering attack surfaces, Microsoft last week reminded everyone that they're finally retiring the Internet Explorer 11 web browser from some Windows 10 versions in June and replacing it with the new Chromium-based Microsoft Edge. After being retired on June 15, 2022, the Internet Explorer desktop application will be disabled and out of support, automatically redirecting the users to Microsoft Edge when launched. The IE11 retirement impacts Internet Explorer 11 desktop apps delivered via the semi-annual channel to systems running Windows 10 client SKUs, version 20 H2 and later, and Windows 10 IoT, version 20 H2 and later. The original announcements for this were back in August 2020. Why do we care? Since the lead today was all about recent breaches, how about Internet Explorer 11 still lying around, and Microsoft feeling the need to remind everyone? There has to be a reason, and I'd hazard it's because they see too many customers and applications using it. When we have active warnings about locking systems down, seeing this still out there is pretty disheartening. Or an opportunity to fix it and deliver service. So let's make some sense of some more market data, and I'll start with the sentiment-based surveys. Wingman Marketing, sponsored by Zomentum, released their 2022 MSP Growth Survey. For 2022, the percentage of MSPs expecting revenue growth to come primarily from net new business jumped to 62%. 77% of MSPs said their current workload is at or over capacity. 45% of MSPs said their sales pipelines would sustain the company for 6 months or longer. However, more than half said their pipelines would support them for less than 6 months. In a study by Hornet Security, 93% of IT professionals said their organization is adopting a hybrid of cloud and on-premises solutions or migrating fully to the cloud within 5 years. One half of respondents at 51% said they would be mostly in the cloud in 5 years, with 1 or 2 workloads remaining on premises. 28% said they would remain mostly on premises, with a workload or 2 in the cloud. Approximately 29% of respondents said they use hybrid cloud solutions as a stepping stone to a full cloud environment. However, 2 in 3 at 67% see hybrid as a final destination for their infrastructure due to workloads that must remain on premises. Of course, it's not easy. Enterprise Strategy Group's survey found that 71% of organizations now rely on 3 or more cloud infrastructure providers. A full 84% of survey respondents also noted that tracking costs and cloud cost allocation are burdensome and time-consuming, with 61% admitting they lack sufficient visibility into which teams own cloud resources. Overall, nearly 2/3 of respondents report that the adoption of public clouds has made it more challenging to achieve observability, with almost half of all respondents saying they now consider providing real-time insights into application and infrastructure environments to be a top priority. IDC says AI spending will double by 2025. Gartner, meanwhile, says edge technologies will grow 75% in 2022. This after 5G was the largest investment in 2021, followed by IoT and edge technologies. And that same study says more than half of companies say their board of directors is now among key decision makers guiding investments in emerging technology. And in a forward-looking indicator, the yield gap on 2-year and 10-year Treasury bonds are in danger of slipping below yields on short-term bonds, a relatively rare occurrence known as an inversion. Inverted yield curves can reflect a rising risk of economic recession. Analysts and investors closely watch for this early warning sign. The yield on the 10-year note is now only about a quarter percentage point higher than the 2-year note, with many analysts expecting to see the 10-year fall below the 2-year sometime soon, which is the inversion. Why do we care? Surveys are helpful to get something of a feeling of just recently. So, just recently, MSPs are overworked and most have less than 6 months of the sales pipeline. IT pros think the cloud is within 5 years, but it's hard to track costs around the cloud and observe behavior. And the analysts predict edge technologies, which makes sense linking to what was built in both cloud and 5G. This is why I then couple all of that with the indicator of a possible recession, as I want to be realistic about the conditions. There's opportunity for sure, particularly those leaning into services around cloud and enabling workers. Short sales pipes and a possible upcoming recession are worrisome, so be cautious of any who claim the market is fantastic, and instead practice smart fundamentals. A follow-up to yesterday in Microsoft. The company has confirmed that the group, which it calls Dev0537, compromised a single account and stole parts of source code for some of its products. A blog post on its security site says Microsoft investigators have been tracking the Lapsus group for weeks and details some of their methods to compromise victims' systems. Microsoft maintains that the leaked code is not severe enough to cause an elevation of risk and that its response teams shut down the hackers mid-operation. As a reminder, Microsoft claimed attackers would access source code after the SolarWinds hack. Why do we care? Everyone's going to get hit, even Microsoft. Frankly, I think they're on their game, and I have no reason to distrust them here besides general sentiments of zero trust, worthy of tracking the hit, and particularly following Lapsus. And a follow-up to the Okta story. The company clarified in a new blog post that about 2.5% of customers have, quote, potentially been impacted or whose data may have been viewed or acted upon. We have identified those customers and are contacting them directly, end quote. The company claims that the service was not breached and that the, quote, potential impact to Okta customers is limited to the access that support engineers have. These engineers are unable to create or delete users or download customer databases. Support engineers do have access to limited data, for example, Jira tickets and lists of users that were seen in the screenshots. Support engineers are also able to facilitate the resetting of passwords and multi-factor authentication factors for users, but are unable to obtain those passwords, end quote. Why do we care? As opposed to Microsoft, this leaves some pretty open concerns, particularly about the resetting of passwords and multi-factor authentication. That feels like potential game over for blocking customer access. Note that's my opinion and not necessarily evidence. But 5 days of access to a support engineer's laptop, which was noted, is the concern. The statement noted a, quote, unsuccessful attempt to compromise the account of a customer support engineer, end quote. It's a bit of a mixed message, and thus my takeaway. Transparency helps. Knowing what happened allows everyone down the supply chain to understand their own risks. My criticism is that this is causing more confusion, not less. Crisis Management 101. Be clear with your communications. Infosec Research Group has released its 2022 Trends Report on the IT talent market. quoting from Channel Futures. Infotech's research indicates that to compete, successful organizations will need to incorporate new ways of working. This is beyond simply having a remote work policy. The IT talent market will never be the same. Organizations must reevaluate their employee experience from the bottom up to weather the shift to the new normal successfully. Research conducted by Time is Limited illustrates that holding on to workers currently employed has still not become a priority despite a major turnover among many enterprises. Just 39% of HR leaders say improving retention is a top objective in their businesses. By contrast, 94% of HR leaders believe that employees' experience at their company to be important, but a disconnect exists between the hiring department and the current state of the workforce. This discrepancy between the views of hiring managers and executives leads to unsustainable amounts of brain drain as employees look for work elsewhere when experience at a company is deemed unsatisfactory. By and large, the unsatisfactory employee experience is leading to high amounts of turnover within several companies around the US, as 61% of HR executives believe that retention rates for those hired during the pandemic will be lower than pre-pandemic rates. Of the businesses included in the survey, 76% stated they were experiencing more year-over-year employee departures, and 68% of enterprises have a turnover rate higher than 10%. Insider makes my case too with a series of interviews of employees doing exactly what I expected, pushing back and saying no thank you to returning to the office. Google too getting pushback. Per more reporting in Insider, Googlers pushed back on the company's return to office plans, asking why all employees weren't able to choose to be permanently remote and arguing that the rules around remote work were being applied inconsistently. This at a recent company all hands. Even some governments are figuring this out. In Connecticut, there's a pilot project at the state level that's halfway completed to test some IT staff at 100% remote work, only coming into the office if absolutely necessary. That from State Scoop. And in an interesting survey of UK workers, the majority support laws that include a right to disconnect from their employer. More than half of UK workers deem it unacceptable for their employer to expect them to respond to emails, texts, calls, and instant messages sent by their boss during private or leisure time, the survey found. 2/3 of UK workers said they participate in work-related communications outside of their working hours, with just 30% abstaining completely from communication with their workplace outside of their contracted hours. Why do we care? The old way of work is dead, and not enough companies have realized that. Here's my other data for that. 75% of executives want to come back to the office 3 or more days a week, compared with just 37% of rank and file employees, according to a Slack Future Forum report. And it's happening that way. Data from Castle Systems showing the weekly occupancy rates for offices is at just 39.5%. And even at the worst of the pandemic, it was at just under 20%, a far cry from that near 100% in the before times. The sooner businesses wise up and recognize what is happening, the better off they'll be. And when I can point to governments as figuring this out before many executives, well, leaders with no one behind them are just on a walk. Standing stubbornly with arms crossed that you can force workers, combined with this lack of investment and retention, shows the space for agile, smart organizations to pull ahead, and a range of opportunity to help organizations be those winners. This is playing out as predicted. According to research from Kulik, a little over 1 in 5 employees believe their employer is preparing them for a more data-oriented and automated workplace at 21%. This is despite most business leaders predicting an upheaval in working practices due to the rapid onset of AI. The report, Data Literacy, the upskilling evolution, found that 35% of employees say they had changed jobs in the last 12 months because their employer wasn't offering enough upskilling and training opportunities. That from Channel Life New Zealand. And while I'm on digital skills, here's some new research by academics at the Warwick Business School and the University of Sydney Business School. They dug into the use of PowerPoint in business and found that the people who designed and edited the slides strongly influenced the direction a company's strategy took, and have suggested that employees who want to influence company strategy should help design the firm's presentations. Quote, our findings suggest that those who craft the visuals in PowerPoint slides have the power to influence a strategy's direction. PowerPoint's visual features are intimately connected to the direction strategy conversations take and subsequent activities, they said. The researchers added that since the power is, quote, in the eye of the slide creator, organizations should consider who is making the slides and who the audience will be. Why do we care? Those who make the PowerPoint visuals guide direction, plus they're the ones who get to pitch the ideas. The power of presenting ideas, telling stories, and delivering messages is a skill worth investing in, and those that do that get to set strategy. Should be a pretty good selling point for training services, too. It's been a busy week on the legislation front. Under review in Congress, a new bill was introduced to create a pilot program that would extend the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's network monitoring services for federal agencies to state and local governments. It would run over 3 years, and those governments could enroll in CISA's Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, which monitors federal agencies' networks in close to real time and gives officials dashboards showing vulnerabilities to be addressed. The same bill would also codify and expand the Homeland Security Department's Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program that helps federal agencies protect their networks. Those same co-sponsors of the bill also introduced the Legacy IT Reduction Act of 2022 to make the modernization of federal legacy IT systems mandatory. They would require agencies to identify and create an inventory of all legacy IT systems. Agencies would also be required to include comprehensive information in their inventories about any legacy IT systems currently in use, including contractor and ownership information, operation and maintenance costs, and how the systems support mission objectives. A third bill was explicitly introduced around cybersecurity at the Department of Veterans Affairs. It would require the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to obtain an independent cybersecurity assessment of VA information systems and submit a plan to address weaknesses to Congress. And reviewing past legislation, the Strengthening American Cybersecurity Act of 2022 has some interesting language. Already passed, Title II defines explicitly a managed services provider by name as, quote, an entity that delivers services such as network, application, infrastructure, or security services via ongoing and regular support and active administration on the premises of a customer in the data center of the entity, such as hosting, or a third-party data center. The law requires that MSPs report any breach of their operations or systems within 72 hours or within 24 hours if a ransomware payment was made. It also codifies a federal vulnerability disclosure program in which vulnerability reporters will coordinate with federal agencies to share information in a consistent, automated, and machine-readable manner. Finally, in investigations, the Senate released an investigation of the FBI into 3 cases of ransomware attacks against U.S. companies within the past 5 years. All 3 companies interviewed for the investigation reported the attacks to the FBI at the time, but only 2 pursued assistance. The findings point out that both companies that asked for help from the FBI found response lacking. The report notes, quote, both companies also indicated they did not receive advice on best practices for responding to a ransomware attack or other useful guidance from the federal government. Why do we care? Just wanted to note that the government is doing its SOC for itself. Sure, it's not really a SOC, though it looks a bit like one when I squint. The more significant point is the specific actions being taken to address cybersecurity. Besides making that service available to state, local, and tribal governments, aka the small businesses of government, a push to address older IT systems. The FBI heat will cause some reevaluation of response. I'd expect that naturally, as law enforcement has shifted their response in general, particularly lately, and this is a late report. That said, expect more proactive protections to come. Oh, and that specific language for providers? So are you digging into this law? Sure, it may not apply to your industry, but with actual legal definitions, providers better know what the government calls them. The Lapsus hacking group has made the headlines this week, particularly around Microsoft and Okta earlier in the week. Turns out, an England-based teenager may be in charge of it. Bloomberg with the story. Quote, 4 researchers investigating the hacking group Lapsus on behalf of companies that were attacked said they believe the teenager is the mastermind, Bloomberg said. However, the teenager, who apparently uses the online aliases White and Breachbase, has not been accused by law enforcement, and the researchers, quote, haven't been able to conclusively tie him to every hack Lapsus has claimed, Bloomberg said. The teenager's mother was unaware. That's not to say the gang isn't dangerous. Profiles are coming out focused on the other victims, including Nvidia, Samsung, Ubisoft, and the Brazilian Ministry of Health. That teenager isn't alone, and Lapsus uses a Telegram channel to share information about its attacks and data stolen from its victims directly with anyone who is subscribed to it. The teen may not be the only one. The reporting identifies another teenager based in Brazil, and the group is noted to be highly skilled. And continuing the story, the BBC then reported that London police say they have arrested 7 teenagers in relation to the gang, but will not say if he is one. From the police, quote, 7 people between the ages of 16 and 21 have been arrested in connection with this investigation and have all been released under investigation. Our inquiries remain ongoing. I'm also referencing a Vice piece that profiles the group. Here's a key quote. Lapsus abuses the human weaknesses inside companies, such as their IT or customer support. In other cases, they purchase already hacked login tokens from the digital underground. Ordinarily, some cybersecurity professionals may see these as low-level threats. The reality is that sophistication is not the only metric that makes a hacker a security risk. So is their audacity. Why do we care? I talk a lot about the organization of these gangs. Well, here's one a little less organized. That said, it's that statement about the threat level. Low-level threats, huh? Their brazen nature makes them a real threat, and that's not to be overlooked. Learning threat modeling is the skill to consider here, and making sure those models constantly take in new inputs. Thanks for tuning in to This Week in the Business of Tech. Shows come out each week, pulling together the daily podcast. If you like this show, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The content here is possible because of supporters like you. If you want access to shows early, answers to your questions, and private interactions, join our Patreon. It's pay what you want. You decide what the content is worth. Join at patreon.com/MSPradio. Patreons also get access to the written versions of every story as they come out. If you want the stories right away, you can get them on the daily podcast. Find The Business of Tech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. Subscribe links at businessof.tech, and I'll talk to you again next week.